There we go.
All right, everybody click continue. So I sent out a little agenda, which was, if I remember correctly, that we would just start with the main purpose we had in setting this up, which was just to go around and get everybody's feelings about what we're doing and why, and introduce ourselves to each other. The second point, I am hoping that we can get some kind of a standing committee. So it's not just me initiating every email and making kind of all the decisions, which is making me feel very uncomfortable. I hate to be in that position. And then the third point is just to think about two logistical tasks that we have, and maybe there's some other tasks. Is there anything else for the agenda? Okay, we're a small group, but I'll facilitate informally. Since we're recording, I don't think we need notes. And is there someone who would like to start to kick off the first point? Who are you? Where do you come from? What are you thinking? And what are your hopes for this project?
I
I
will.
can start.
No,
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, all right.
CJ, I'll call on you first.
Oh, okay. So the first thing that I will say is that I've been spending the last month moving, and before that I was trying to buy a house. And I have a toddler. So if I make little to no sense, that's why. And I'm happy to share more about myself and why I want to be involved in this process, further in the future in email. But what I will say is that as far as the Green Party goes, I have been a member for a long time, but I've been an active member locally and then slowly from the local up to national, starting in 2016 and really in 2017. And before that, I was a chapter founder for DSA, and trying to have this conversation and trying to being willing to facilitate this conversation, and was used against me as a reason to basically eject me from DSA, and my own history as a desisted, formerly identifying as trans person who still has a complicated relationship with gender, was also sort of weaponized for political ends in that organization, that had nothing to do with that issue. And it really, really opened my eyes to how a lot of people who claim to be supporting trans people who aren't trans themselves are not even necessarily listening to the vast majority of people with diverse gender experiences, and often using them as a tool, a political tool, and it grosses me right out. And because of that experience, I ended up making a YouTube channel that is now private because of my partner's job as an equity coordinator for a school district. That kind of connected me a lot to currently trans identified people who make videos who are dissenting to a certain extent, and also people who had similar experiences in leftist organizations, as well as a lot of detransition people and a lot of parents of young autistic female children who had rapidly developed a trans identity, who were very concerned and wanted me to tell them what to do. And I was like, I cannot tell you what to do. I am just sharing my thoughts. So anyway, the fact that we are where we are with the Green Party, it scares me because it's legitimately triggering to me based on what happened with DSA, which was traumatic to me and how it all went down. But it's also encouraging that this group exists and that we want to do what we want to do. And the amount of conversations I've had with people one-on-one that were really encouraging. And so that's who I am, and that's why I want to be involved with this, because I believe in having conversations, and I think that language is hard and feelings are hard, and personal identity versus political collective reality is hard and we need to be able to talk about it or we can't accomplish anything. And I don't want to see that used in the Green Party. And I don't want to see trans people hurt. I don't want to see women hurt. And I want us to be a party for everybody. And I think that trying to establish this blog is a really good step. And I've said to Steve before that I think that this issue is an example. It shows a dynamic that exists in the current times with a lot of issues. And I think if we can have this conversation around gender and biological sex and all of that stuff, it's just a really good example of what we can do on other issues as well. So I have a complicated health situation and a complicated personal situation because of my partner's job. But I would love to be a moderator and I would love to write and have conversations as well if I can. I do have a history in some editing and some website stuff, so not in a technical level, but I would just love to participate in that way, and I'm really happy this is happening.
Can I ask you a question, CJ? You have been, and I think you still formally are, on the executive committee of the New York State
Yes.
Committee and a national committee rep from New York. At
Yes.
one point, we're talking about resigning. Have you done that or
Yeah,
not done
I
it?
attempted to resign from both when I got some health news a while ago. But it was like, I don't even remember now exactly what happened, but anyway, they didn't like accept my resignation. So I was like, I will hold off and wait. And so I'm still technically part of both of those bodies, and I'm hoping in the next few weeks to get some more answers about the health stuff that I'm dealing with to find out whether I'll be able to continue to serve in those roles, because I'm willing to if I'm able to.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions for CJ before we go on? Okay. I saw Alan's hand in the air, so let's call on Alan next.
Okay. I'm able to host this on Zoom as a consequence of having purchased a Zoom subscription membership in order to promote my book, which came out last year. I was hoping to have a lot more roundtables and stuff with like other authors and people who want to discuss gender and stuff like that. After many years of trying, I finally got my book into print. The book in question covers events from 40 years ago when I came out on University of New Mexico campus. At that time, there was not a social phenomenon like there is now of people identifying as non-binary or genderqueer or whatever. There were people who were identifying as transsexual, and I had heard about them and I had read their accounts, and there was definitely a strong resonance of, oh, these people are more like me than anyone else I have run into. But ultimately, their solution was to modify their body and present themselves into the world as a person who was of the other sex, because they felt that being perceived as such would cause them to be regarded and treated more as who they actually were than was the case when they were regarded and treated as the sex to which they were born. These phrases I just used would be considered volatile nowadays, but they were pretty commonplace 40 years ago. So at that time, I recognized them as definitely kindred spirits, but their solution wasn't a solution that seemed appropriate for me. And one of the sticking points that really made me sit back and say, yeah, wait a minute, was the not so incidental fact that my attraction was towards female people. Now, we had a notion of femme or sissy or effeminate or girlish male type, whatever, you know, choose your own term. It certainly was a notion that such people existed was already out there, but it was strongly linked with the notion of having same-sex sexual attraction in males. Similarly, there were butch female people, but they were assumed to be lesbians. So it's not so much that we didn't have any notion of gender variance, but our notions of gender variance were very much intertangled with our notions of sexual orientation variance. My next blog post plans are to write about the complete absence of any movies, any films, any novels featuring as a main character a heterosexual, femme kind of male person. It still isn't out there. It's not accessible. There are no role models. And so a person who happens to have been born to a male body who comes of age and starts coping with the need to be perceived in such a way that they can connect with other people in all of the ways that we want to connect as social creatures, as adult creatures, as sexual creatures. The most prominent model they've got for how to deal with being gender variant as a person born male is to still seek transition. The concept of transgender nowadays is described as an umbrella. Oh, you get to call yourself transgender if in any shape, way, fashion, or form, your gender identity is different than what your mom's OB scrawled out on your birth certificate. Well, that's cool and groovy and all inclusive. That would describe me too. But the rhetoric that's associated with being transgender is still very much bottled up in the notion of transitioning, the notion that if you identify as a girl or a woman, you will, of course, want to be perceived as female. It would be insulting to do anything otherwise. And there's still no rule to say, no, there's no room to say, I'm a girl, woman, gal, you know, choose your own word, femme, but I happen to be male. I don't want to be taken as a cisgender woman. I don't want to blend in and be indistinguishable from cisgender women. I am my own creature. I'm not one of the boys. I was never one of the boys. I don't want to fault people for choosing transgender as the route that makes the most sense to them. I want to protect my transgender sisters and brothers and the validity of their identities that work for them and that express who they understand themselves to be. But I want to put the alternative that I found on the board so that it's a possibility that people coming of age in forthcoming years will have available to themselves to consider and see if that resonates with them. I would love to be in a group of this nature that had people like Anne Minash and Margaret Elizabeth from the Lavenders. But most of the people that have staked out their territory aren't really in a mood to listen, and they're reinforced by sort of the group membership interpersonal validations that come from being with a group of people who think the same way that you do, and they've become so oppositionally divided. So I'm looking forward to being a participant here, where I think we're more likely to have people that are exploring this with less of an ideological position that I know what's right, and you're either in agreement with me or you're wrong.
Okay, Ellie, I saw your hand. Are there any questions for Alan? Mary, go ahead.
Yes, book title, please. Some of us want it. Inquiring minds want to know, Alan.
It's Genderqueer, a story from a different closet. And I'm going to stick the info in chat.
Okay, great.
And where are you, Alan?
I am in Long Island, just outside of Queens.
Long Island, okay. Thank you.
Okay, Ellie, why don't you go next?
Okay. I came here mainly because of a concern with the nature of the discourse that we can conduct. As for myself, I've been a member of a Green Party in Massachusetts since '97. I didn't get involved with the National Committee for at least 5 or 6 years. I came here from years of political activism without finding a political party of any kind to which I could attach myself. Ecological thinking is something that I developed through reading the work of Odom and other thinkers and scientists who were instrumental in the development of ecological theory, including social ecology and so forth. So when I was recruited into the Green Party by 2 members in '97 into the Mystic River Greens, I thought I was joining a particular kind of political party that would satisfy my requirements of a politics that is worth pursuing. That politics is very, very much dependent upon a use of language precisely to enable decision-making at the local level. As a delegate to the National Committee from the Green Rainbow Party in Massachusetts, I participated mainly in the work of the Platform Committee, and there I had an opportunity to see the undisciplined discourse which people allow themselves as though their opinions matter of necessity because of their opinions. So the first thing that I noticed was that people decided that they were not given the respect due to their persons by critical thinking. I found myself in the position of wanting to examine an idea and being looked at as though something was the matter with my head. But when I read Ecological Wisdom, then I began to work in ways that might be acceptable. So my main achievement as a member of the Platform Committee was accomplished thanks to the work of John Hillegas in Mississippi, who was, together with me, a member of the committee that would review the 10 key value texts. The current key value text is my work. It was the changes that were made in it are the work that I managed to do. And not only was it approved, but it was approved first by the National Committee and was following that was approved by a convention. So it came before a convention. And so the current text of the 10 key values. So when I hear people appealing to the 10 key values as a creed, I don't understand where they're coming from. So the real question, excuse me, I'm getting wavering in the screen. The problem that I'm having essentially is one in which rational discourse of something is possible. This requires an environment in which dissent is possible. And in this case, without protecting dissent, we cannot arrive at truth. So not only ecological wisdom is at work, but also ecological knowledge. Wisdom is concerned both what we know and we do not know, and being prepared to assume the consequences of decisions which had unforeseen consequences. So it's the whole idea of wisdom is the ability, well, know thyself, and certainly be ready for questioning of accepted terms of thought. But ecological knowledge demands much more than that. It demands research, study, and an understanding of systems thinking, and a use of language that is precise. The rhetoric has to be a rhetoric of truth seeking, not of position, not of ideology. So when I hear a story like about the DSA, I understand that many of the people who came to this party came to it with ideological assumptions. I came into it because I was questioning ideological assumptions. And I also have been trained in a discourse. Part of it originates in frame of reference. Part of it originates in the work of Mead, others, and ecological thinking. John Rensenbrink is important to me in this respect because he knows most of the things that I know about ecological politics and ecological thinking. And the first thing is that idea is the critique of ideology. And it's difficult for me to understand why people who assume ideological positions are not prepared to have them scrutinized. So it's in that context. And I also have to admit that I'm privileged, and I'm privileged mainly by the fact that I have lived for a very, very long time, and I grew up around dissidents from an early age, growing up in South New Jersey and in Philadelphia. All the things that are not talked about were talked about. As a teenager, you know, there anything that had to do with color, caste, anything that had to do with social class, there was nothing that was not discussable. And I was around discussions from a very early age by people who were questioning everything and anything. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Other questions for Ellie?
Yes.
All right. If not, Mary or Tekla, would you like to take a turn? I'm happy to go if you want to wait.
I'm okay with going.
Okay,
So I'm Mary Rooker, R-O-O-K-E-R, from Tacoma Park, Maryland. If you don't know Maryland, Tacoma Park is right a mile and a half from the Washington, D.C. line. So I'm not far from Daryl Moak, and whom I really just met like 2 weeks ago. Let's see, I'm 68 years old. I started as an activist, political activist in 1974, 1975 with the National Organization for Women. And I joined because back then it was hard to know where to find another lesbian. And I'd heard that NOW was a horrible, horrible organization because it was full of commies and lesbians. And I said, oh, really? There are others? I mean, oh, how terrible. So I checked out a NOW meeting and I found other lesbians. I was so happy. I found there were some straight women too, don't get me wrong, but I found plenty of lesbians. So I was a happy camper. I didn't really care. I wasn't a feminist. I was just looking for other lesbians. But anyway, and I've been involved in the anti-apartheid movement, the U.S. out of Central America movement, the environmental movement, the Black Lives Matter. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. If there's a movement, I've been involved in it over the years, and I learned something from each one, so I'm grateful. And I'm a change agent, even in shamanism. I have my own shamanic healing and teaching practice, which is a spiritual thing. And even there, I bring up the gender issues. It's not Mother Earth, it's just Earth. Like, hello. And they, oh no, the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I'm just like, do you issue a barf bucket with this, conversation? So I don't, you're in trouble when you don't even fit in with the woo-woo crowd. So I have this like everywhere, and I've been vegan for 30 years, but I'm in favor of eating insects because I think we're meant to anatomically. Anyway, and I'm not squeamish. I have no trouble with predators. I think lions are fantastic. If I thought we were meant to eat animals, I'd be in favor of it. So I get kicked out of vegan circles. I get kicked out of every circle I'm in. You remember when you were a kid, they had that which item in the set does not belong? It's me. And I'm Unitarian Universalist, and I don't fit in there either. As a Green, there's a bunch of Democrats who don't really understand me at all. But you're not voting for Biden? Like, fuck no. Why would I do that? I'd rather die. And they just don't get me at all. So about a year ago, I was unquestioningly fully pro the trans rights agenda. I just didn't even ask. It came up for a vote to censure Georgia in my Maryland State Green Party back in May 2020. And I was like, well, yeah, is there anything, our delegates, is there something weird about this that we need to know? They're like, no, we are in favor of it. And I was just like, okay, rubber stamp, boom, and then I started to ask questions because there started to be some noise more recently. And I'm still pro trans rights because I'm trans myself, but my position is more nuanced, and that's why I'm in here. But I sometimes wish we could throw out the Georgia diehards and the pro trans rights activists. You guys just leave the room, no cookies, no soy milk, just go to the room and let the rest of us figure this out, and then we'll tell you what we decide, and you will shut up and just, okay? And I hate to tell anybody to shut up, but it's like, I really don't want to hear it. You've had enough floor time. So that's kind of where I'm at. And let's see, I identify as agender and NB, but I don't like either one of those because they still identify me by what I'm not, by gender and by binaries. And I never met a binary I liked. Alan, just one last thing. You really touched my heart when you said, talked about what you want to wear. I remember when women first started wearing pantsuits. I graduated high school in 1970. Girls still had to wear skirts and dresses to school. Right. This was public school. This was not Catholic school. This was public school. And the year after, they changed it so that girls could wear pants to school. And I thought, oh, great. They wait till till I graduated. But I mean, I was always femmy anyway. But I wanted the choice. And yes. I've often wondered, when are males gonna wear dresses? They would look great in dresses. They would look great with long hair and earrings. I mean, what's up with these men? When are they gonna get it that they've got freedom? They can wear whatever the fuck they want, and dress however they want and wear makeup. Hey, you want the makeup? It's yours. You want the high heels? It's all yours. I'm already tired of screwing them with my feet and my back and my pelvis. You can have them. But, play with them fine. So I've been wondering, when would this happen? And why they think it means they're a woman. I mean, it's one thing if you really identify as a woman for other reasons, but just because you like the clothes and the makeup and the hairstyles, like, nah, do what you want, Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I'm glad some male-bodied people are loving their bodies the way they are and saying, hey, I have a right to wear whatever I want. So I can't think of anything else, anything I missed.
And anybody else think of a question that they would like to ask Mary that she has missed? If not, Tekla, I'll give you the option of going, or I'll take the floor.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a tiny town in northern Vermont, right on the Canadian border. The child of a became a single mother. That's because our father walked out, and he took the car too. my mother's parting words to him: "Don't take the car," and he drove away in the car. But she maintained always that women can do everything that men can do and do it just as well. So I was sort of born a feminist, for which I'm grateful, and I think she's right. She was right. And she cared a great deal about justice because she had grown up poor and Polish, the daughter of Polish immigrants, in a town in Vermont where that was the worst thing you could be. So class was, the injustice of class was hugely important to her. And I have to say, justice is exceedingly important to me. But democracy is also exceedingly important. Democracy and fairness. And I saw in Solidarity when Anne Minash was basically forced out of Solidarity because she maintained that women should be allowed to caucus on their own. And I am so opposed to that, the denial of free speech, because I think free speech is essential for democracy. If you don't ever let people talk that disagree with you, it's not possible for there to be democracy. It's only democracy for the people that agree with you. That's not democracy. So that is why I have been so concerned over the gender issue, because of the denial of a forum for the gender critical feminists to speak. It's not that I agree with them on everything. I disagree with them on some things. But they must be allowed to speak or we don't have any democracy. So that's why I think the blog is a really good idea. And it would be wonderful if we could create a blog where the discourse is respectful and sensible and language is used carefully. I agree with Ellie on that. The way you use the language is terribly important. And this incredible fight over the word woman. What is the definition of woman? Well, people have different definitions. That's okay with me. You make clear what your definition is. But to just claim that trans women are women without any sensible definition that people can agree on as to what is a woman, that's crazy. So the language issue is a big one for me.
Okay, are you done, Tekla?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, questions for Tekla? If not, I will offer my contribution. I like Mary's metaphor of asking others to leave the room so that the adults who remain can have a conversation. I think that just captures my idea of what this process should be. We should be trying to gather together the adults who are capable of having a rational conversation with each other, respecting difference, respecting dialogue. Um, and it seems to me, I'm encouraged by this conversation because it seems to me that's animating everybody's contributions today. Um, as far as who I am, I'm a red diaper baby. The first political event I can remember was when I was 6 years old, a picket line for the Rosenbergs on the eve of their execution, which my mother took me to. And I have been engaged in National Brotherhood. It was National Brotherhood Week every year. It was, ban the bomb. It was all that stuff that people from my milieu were engaged with. I later converted to another variety of Marxism um, uh, when I joined the Young Socialist Alliance and the Trotskyist movement in 1968. I was active in the SWP. So I'm a very ideological person, but I very much identify with Ellie's conception of ideology that has to be open to both criticism from others and self-criticism. And I often like to say to people, you will not find 10 years in the life of any revolutionary that you admire. Marx, Engels, Rosa Luxemburg, Alexander Kollontai, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and I'll put Martin Luther King in my revolutionary pantheon, where they, at the end of that 10 years, they believed everything they believed at the beginning of the 10 years and would have affirmed everything that they said 10 years ago. They would have revised a dozen things that they said 10 years ago. So we all have to live in the moment, knowing that if we're alive 10 years from now, the things we think now, we will think we're naive, or at least some of the things we think now, we will think we're naive 10 years from now. So that spirit of engagement and dialogue, I think, is essential. One of the things that we did achieve in the Socialist Workers' Party milieu was to develop a deep appreciation of the feminist radicalization in the 1970s. And I think that holds over. Anne Monash was part of that too. That holds over, that informs a lot of where I'm coming from in all of this. Because I do think that the fight for women's rights, that is women as a biological species, the rights of biological women who were oppressed as a sex, is one of the key struggles historically, and even, you could argue prehistorically. And we can't allow the present moment to diminish that or make it worth less or somehow be unimportant. At the same time, I've also always identified with every oppressed human being and tried to live by the slogan, as long as one person is oppressed, I'm not free. There was one incident in the Socialist Workers' Party where the party showed how bad it was on the issues that we're concerned with, when there was what we would now call a transgender woman, what at that point we called a preoperative transsexual, in the Brooklyn branch, the man who presented as a woman. And when the branch leadership found out about it, they went crazy and demanded her resignation from the party. As I recall, I was the only one who said we should not accept her resignation, and we should accept her in the party. There are other people in the branch who now tell me that I'm wrong about that they stood up to, but I don't remember anybody but me. In any case, that's who I am. I try to grab that dialectic, that the oppression of one cannot be solved through the oppression of somebody else. And I come to this discussion with that ethos in mind. So I guess that's enough about me and my hopes and expectations for the project. Do we want to have a little cross dialogue, responses from people to what others have said? I have
Well,
these Andrew
first, does
going
anybody
last.
have anything they want to say? Any questions for Steve?
That's right. Okay, I see no questions for me. By the way, I'm also a poet and a composer. I write music and I write poetry. I actually sent Mary, when I had my first conversation with Mary, I sent her a poem that I'd totally forgotten about, which starts, "When the Society of Misfits tells you that you will never fit in," as an image to, but here we have her. She's right here in our midst. I think we can have a little.
One of the themes I've been picking up on is in contrast to the popular notion that you get empowerment from finally finding a group of like-minded individuals and bonding with them. That there's a different kind of strength perhaps that comes with never successfully finding that. That you remain a person who actually does your own thinking instead of falling prey to the tendency to buy your beliefs in a little prepackaged Ziploc bag that is what's being passed around in your little group. And you get the reinforcement of being surrounded by people who already agree with you. And so when you say these things, you're being told you're saying the right things. It leads to a closed-mindedness that I think people aren't even aware that they've embraced. But as much as I wish I had found my own people to an extent that I never did, I've hit an age where I'm kind of proud of doing my own damn thinking.
Maybe we're finding our like-minded people here through people who accept the idea that we don't have to find like-minded people. So that's CJ, you look pregnant with a thought, or is it?
Oh, my child is upstairs intermittently screaming because he made a mess and his father is making him wash his hands.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
Child abuse.
All right, if there's
I know.
nothing,
You'd think we were skinning him alive because we wouldn't let him, slide down slides in his poopy diaper. Although this is only tangentially related, but my son is almost 3 and he has long hair and he gets called a girl so often and like he doesn't care, but it's really funny because he like plays around with it and like we were teaching him like I've already come up against this idea of like I have to think like teaching him that he has a penis like daddy, like because he asks about it. And then I'm sitting there thinking like, is it wrong of me to say, well, because you're both boys, like, and I don't know, it's that kind of thing where I don't know, like, it's just the whole thing. There's a lot of things like being in like leftist and progressive circles with a child that you like come up against, and it's very strange. And I talk to my other friends that have small children about it, and like I don't know where I'm going with this, but there's a whole part of why this conversation is important to me that has to do with the fact that I have a son, and the fact that I want him to live in a world where he can wear makeup if he wants to, and he can like girl things if he wants to, and he can have long hair, and he can do whatever he wants to do, and not, he can continue to like playing with dolls and like, but also like playing with cars and not have to deal with what I dealt with as a kid, where that means you're doing gender wrong. And I just genuinely wish we lived in a post-gender world, but we don't. And I think that, I don't know, I'm just,
no,
there's so many like language barriers to people who have a lot of similar issues with what gender does to people And I also think there's a major critique of the role of capitalism in some aspects of transgender ideology that need to happen. So I hope to write about that, because I have a whole theory about neoliberalism and the proliferation of micro identities. So
I have a feeling that another thing which will unite those of us on this call is the idea that each human being is unique and should be able to express that uniqueness in any way that's reasonable. I remember when I was in elementary school, I liked to jump rope with the girls because I was good at it. And I didn't like to play ball with the boys because I wasn't any good at it. And there was a little girl who lived across the street from the school, and I used to go and play dolls with her, you know. And yet I grew up to be a very heterosexual, normal, quote unquote, from that point of view. So the human potential is just so enormous, and everybody has to have the possibility of finding what works for them. Anything else before we move on?
I just thought of something else. I think that even if you don't agree with the gender critical stance on the gender critical stance, I think that there's been this sort of move to say anyone at any point in feminism who's written feminist theory who didn't agree with current 2021 exactly what in this day, week, and month we've decided is the appropriate stance to have on gender, they should be canceled and everything they said is worthless. And for me, as a female human being who now considers myself a feminist, that did not for my whole life because I only saw third wave feminism, reading second wave feminism and reading feminist theory, like not only did that inform my view of gender and sex and my analysis of that, but it was also my entryway into political analysis in general. And I think that we stand to lose a lot if we just write all of that off. And I think, what we're all talking about, the fact that you don't have to agree with every single thing a person says in order to find that they may have some valuable things to say, or that reading what you disagree with can inform your own analysis. That, like, I don't know, I think that that's super important. And that's another thing that worries me. And I don't know where I was going with that, but that's just my thought on that.
Okay.
There are probably a lot of things that if you dig into Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels that you could find that are totally deplorable. And yet we don't say, well, they're no good. We're not going to read any of their shit anymore. To
Part
hell
of
with
what the
socialism
DSA
and
used to
Marxism. That's just
deplatform me
out.
was quoting Engels.
Yeah.
I quoted Engels and they said that my Engels quote was transphobic.
Mm-hmm. The radical feminist theory of the 70s and 80s was the revolutionary theory of the 20th century. It was to the 20th century what Marxist theory was to the 19th. And anyone who's not versed in it is intellectually undereducated. You don't have to agree with everything they say, but you should really be familiar with it. And it's not about boys should also be able to wear skirts. It's about for a lot of male people, sexual viability is somehow intertwined with the idea of conquest and coercion, and that has become eroticized to the point that it's interwoven into the value system of our entire society.
David, I see you came back.
Did it say that I left the meeting? It's not true.
Well, okay, if you've been listening, that's good, but you weren't on screen at all.
No, it was a power outage where I'm staying. I was
Oh.
dumped.
Okay. So you haven't been on and you didn't hear, or were you on the phone or
So
something?
I heard CJ and Alan and part of what Ailey said. And
Okay.
unfortunately, I missed the rest.
All right, well, listen, we're recording this, so you can go back and listen to everybody's comments if you want to.
Mhm.
But why don't you take the floor and just say a few words, if you like, about what your thinking
Okay.
is and what your reason for wanting to be involved, what your goals are for this, etc.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm with Ailey. I'm a member of the Green Rainbow Party of Massachusetts. I'm a relatively new active member. And I see what's happening. I think the discussion that we're having here is very, very necessary, and I feel privileged to be part of it. With those who are here, among the people I want most to discuss with. But of course, it should be a party-wide discussion instead of what we have, which in my opinion is a ruthless purge by a cult. And I happen to be involved in battling this, and that's probably what differentiates me from others, although Steve has been part of that somewhat. Steve is doing two things at once. I guess I am too, but I'm not going to be spending a lot of time or hope on this project unless it persists after the expulsion of the Georgia party. And my experience in Massachusetts is entirely different from Steve's. And I'd like to understand that. My experience in Massachusetts is that we, Ailey and I and two others, made a proposal to oppose the expulsion of the Georgia party. And the result of that was, let's say, not progress. I don't know if Ailey agrees with that or not. Ailey and I don't always agree. And therefore, I consider the Green Party on the way down. I consider it to be fracturing. I consider it unable to host the kind of discussion we're having. And at the same time, perhaps I'm wrong. And perhaps this discussion that we're having here will thrive and the Green Party will heal itself. And my views on gender and sex are a little bit off from the views of the gender critical radical feminists that I work with. And I don't consider that a big problem. Let's see, I'm not sure I've addressed everything that probably should be addressed. Why don't I do it later?
Yeah, that's okay. You can also add, you can go back and listen to what people said, add thoughts on email, etc. We don't have to think that we're finishing everything tonight. The only thing, does anybody have questions for David or thoughts in response to David? Well, I just want to raise one thought, which is, I think it's clear that the Green Party can't have this discussion, which is why we have to do it in this form. And we're going to gather Greens, and at some point, I think we'll have to think about whether we want to limit it to Greens or whether we want to make it broader than just Greens. My inclination is to think that's probably what's going to happen. But we'll start with a core from the Green Party. But it seems to me that we're doing this precisely because we don't think. I mean, that was my first, when we started dialogue on expulsion, that was my hope, that we would find a receptivity in a broader layer of the Green Party to actually engage in a serious political dialogue, and it just isn't there. So we're going to have
The
to.
center of gravity was pretty far over in the direction of the gender critical group. Anyone that dissented with them was not going to be particularly comfortable in that group. And in all honesty, there's a bunch of them that can be just as fingers in the ear as the most party following of the transgender caucus.
No, you're absolutely right about all of that, Alan. The only difference that I see.
I came of age with radical feminism, and to listen to people in 2020 or 2021 spouting what sounds a whole lot like biological essentialism without any room for dissent or any other way of looking at it. Because if you look at those other ways, you're one of them and we're against them. So you're one of them. So you're in the wrong place, buddy.
Right.
Um,
As I said, Alan, when we started D&E, my hope was we could.
yeah.
It became clear to me very early that D&E was not capable any more than the rest of the Green Party was capable.
Yeah, it's
Um,
unfortunate because there were some really good people in there too.
Yeah. But the only thing I'll say in response is this: the one difference that I think is on the side of the gender critical radical feminist caucus, whatever they call themselves,
Mhm.
they are not calling for the expulsion of the Lavender Caucus, and the Lavender Caucus is calling for their expulsion.
Mhm.
So on that one issue, I can work with them. And that's pretty much what I've been doing in D&E since, and the one function I think D&E can still serve. But your experience in D&E was horrendous. And the response and the reception to you was just, what I can only underline everything you will say about all of that.
There's a lot that can be gained from stepping back and recognizing the validity of making a generalization without making it a prescriptive one and without refusing to acknowledge the exceptions.
Okay, can we move on to the next point on the agenda? We've spent about an hour on this, which I think is good. It's about right. The next point was seeing if we could pull together people who would volunteer to function as a blog committee. I'll call it a blog committee. We'll continue to consult with everybody, obviously, but I would like a core of people who will agree to make this a priority in their lives and help make decisions.
Did you have a
At this
platform in
point, I
mind?
think anybody on this call who wants to volunteer, we need at least 3, I think. We could take as many as 5. I see CJ's hand. Did I hear you, Alan?
I was asking, do you have a platform selected? I don't mean in the sense of like a Green Party position platform, but in the sense of a software platform.
That's the next point on the agenda.
Okay.
Okay. So I see CJ and me. Who else has a hand in the air? I see Tekla.
Tekla.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that? Okay. All right. So we will report that this meeting, and we'll put out the call for others who are on the CC list who want to volunteer. You don't have to have been on this call. So CJ, Tekla, and Steve. Good, that was quick. So the other 2 points were, one is to address the question Alan raised. And I have very rudimentary website building skills, but they're efficient to set up a platform that we would have to take submissions via email and then translate them. I don't have the ability to set up something where somebody can, put it on a blog and have that automatically translated. We don't want that anyway. We want all of our submissions to be moderated. So I can just go ahead and do that with the software I have. What are you pointing to, Alan?
I just realized you're not necessarily seeing people in the same array that I am. I was
Oh,
pointing to CJ who has her hand up.
I was going to call. Yeah, I see CJ's hand. I'll call him.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I just
CJ.
I didn't want to like cut you off. I'm not the best at knowing how to talk in Zoom. So if you're not done, I won't talk yet.
No, I'm finished. I'm just saying if that's the default, I can set something up and send people a
I
link.
know, Steve, that you don't want to use WordPress, and I do want to use WordPress. And
Well,
so I think that we can't choose a platform until we know how we're hosting it and what we need it to do. And like, so that's my first thought on that. Because like, I know that I don't remember who said that they felt like WordPress was difficult to set up, but like to a certain extent that depends on like what hosting service you're using. If you're using a hosting service, some make it super easy to set up WordPress. And I'm not saying we have to use WordPress. I've just used it before and I'm willing to, like, I'm not a super fantastic, amazing WordPress person, but I have used it before. And if I'm one of the people who's going to be doing a lot of that work, I'm relatively comfortable using that platform. And I have not had a chance to look at the one that you've used yet, just because I've been moving. And I don't have any criticisms of it because I haven't looked at it yet. But I do think that we need to, it would be putting the cart before the horse to choose the platform before we know exactly what we want it to do. Like, do we want to be able to have comments? Do we want those comments to go into moderation before they're approved? Do we want people to have an account in order to comment so that we know who they are? Do we, like, how do we want, are the only people who can write on it people who are part of this group, or can people email us with an idea for an article? Like, how does this work? And then as far as like moderation of posts / articles, are the moderators basically an editorial team where we have an email that people are sending either their proposal or their actual piece of writing to? Do we have editorial standards? And then also, is it going to be more like one-off pieces of writing? And like, this is my other thought about comments is, if we want moderated comments, do we want like specific people to be able to respond as if it is a conversation, or are we just saying the general public can comment? Because I also think it would be interesting, for instance, to have, you know, me, Alan, and Mary have all identified outside of cisgender in various ways to have a conversation that we put on the website. Like that kind of thing, I think would be fascinating. And how does that, possibly doing something like that, interact with what platform we choose? So it's my specialty to ask questions I have no answers to. And I've done that and I'm done now.
Okay. I see Daryl has joined us. Welcome, Daryl.
Hello.
It's nice to see you. We've only spoken on the phone and I haven't ever seen your face, so that's nice. We have a 3-point agenda, and we did the point on exchanging our histories, ambitions for the project, etc. But that's all been recorded. So Alan, I assume, will send out the link to the recording when we're done, so everybody, you and everybody else, can watch it. Let's finish this point, and then we can go back and take initial comments from you if you'd like to make a contribution. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Left in my
CJ,
own
I'm sorry, go ahead,
um,
Alan.
left to my own devices, I would like to see something similar to a VB board or a PHP board, a message board where topics get created. Within that topic, there's an original post, and then anyone can reply to it. And you can set it up so that all replies are moderated and only actually appear after they've been okayed. Or you can trust people after you've seen that they're not here to throw sabots into the machinery, and their posts immediately go up. I think you want to avoid something where, in order for something to actually appear where anyone else can see it, you have to receive it as an email and then go into raw HTML and write it and then post the page. That's just exhausting. At least it's exhausting if we get the kind of traffic we're hoping for.
Yeah, I think
Well,
that is sort of depends on.
Does WordPress have a built-in message board thingy? I've only used WordPress
I haven't
for
used
a
it in a
blog.
few years, so I'm not, I mean, anyone can comment.
I mean, you can do a blog on a WordPress site, but I think my thought, I heard what was being said by CJ, and now what Alan is saying, I think I said that right. Is it CJ?
Mhm.
It seems like what's interesting. I always prefer to hear people say what they want to say and know who said what and how they said it, because it's more authentic. And if someone says something that's inappropriate, then a response can be made to that and say, and that if it's on a message board, you can move something to inappropriate comments or something, and explain why, so that person can hear back. I am a believer that many of the people in this issue on all the various sides of it simply only have the information that they have, and that's what they're thinking is the basis of their truth. And so if they present something and they say something that is wrong in the sense of what we're commonly accepting, and someone says, well, we don't use that term anymore, right? So it's like saying differently abled. We were saying that for a long time, thinking it was nicer than saying disabled, but now disabled people would prefer for you to say disabled, which is what we went away from, right? But if you don't know it, you don't know it. So if you say it wrong, I think the objective would be then to educate the person. This is why what you said is inaccurate or not correct. Here's the facts, and that person can accept that or not. And if they choose not to accept it and then still want to do things like misgendering somebody, then you can moderate them and say, well, your posts are now going to be moderated because we find you to be offensive, right? That we find that you are not willing to enter into this collegial space in a way that respects everybody as they choose to be. Even if you share your own opinion about your thoughts about that which we welcome, but we aren't welcoming you to come and just spout your if as a person who's Christian, I would not feel comfortable someone just spouting biblical principles and things, because many of the times that those that are doing it inaccurately. So it takes me even more time to have to correct their flawed interpretation of biblical scripture. So I wouldn't want people coming in and just being able to just keep putting that out there. So we could say, well, we respect your opinion, respect your philosophical, your spiritual, religious beliefs, but in this space, this is what we're saying are the basics. And if you keep coming in saying, well, you're all going to hell, then we're not having a conversation. You're putting people down, and you're only promoting what you think, and you're not listening to anyone else. So I think there has to be a way to balance that. And I do not know, as CJ, I'm always thinking of ideas and thoughts, and I don't know that I have the exact answer for how to do it efficiently, or even if doing it, the eternal diplomat in me wants to do that. But sometimes I'm finding that the diplomacy is not always healthy. Some people have referred to some of that recently as dualism or something like that. I think that's what the two-sidedism, or I don't remember what they called it, but whatever it was, it amounts to not taking seriously or trying to appease both sides without taking any particular side. And in a negotiation, as a facilitator of that makes sense. But in a dialogue and a conversation, there's some tenets of what people might want to say or do that we can't hold as sacred or okay to be said in the same space, if that makes sense. I may be wandering.
It does.
Alan, do you want to speak?
No, I'm in agreement with Daryl. I
Okay.
think there's always a tension between wanting to leave the dialogue open to all perspectives on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, if you're trying to coalesce for some sort of purpose, there has to be some sense of that's really destructive of the purpose that we came here for. But it's nothing that's worth doing has easy answers.
And if I could just add in, since I'm so late coming in, I'm sorry about that. I was on the road and completely forgot. I think that if whatever is put up by this body of people, that putting these are the basic truths that we are accepting as the foundation for this conversation, and putting those out there so it's very, very clear to anyone, because my concern is that folks on some of the extremes will not be ready or willing to participate in the whatever the conversations are that this group might want to be proposing. I would also not refer in any way to any existing faction. I would not refer to this as in response to the Lavenders, in response to Georgia or the DNE. I think those are all right now toxic things to say. So
Totally.
we don't. We should be, I think, on the side of getting people to come to an understanding of how we coexist together. And but I do think saying some basic tenets. What are our basic tenets around trans issues, since this is the elephant in the room, it is about this, right? So what are those basic tenets? What are the basic tenets about people's right to say what they think and be heard, but also the right to people not to be abused by people saying what they think and heard? I think we have to like lay those points out and let that be clear on the opening of whatever anybody sees about this, and then invite them into a conversation that allows them to click and say, I understand, I've read this, I agree, and then they can go into this, come into the space. And that might even require them to put in their email address or something like that so that we can identify them as a real person, and then they can come into the site. But they have to have seen that, but then those tenants are still present on the inside of the site once they get past that opening page. And once you've done that, you don't have to do it again. You can re-enter by putting in your email address, and that lets you know that you've already agreed to these tenets. And that way, if someone is getting out of line or out of order or being disrespectful, we can say, let me remind you of our tenets. And Facebook groups do it all the time. And they will send reminders, their moderators will send reminders and all that kind of stuff. So hence that actually might be another way without a WordPress site, is to do it through a Facebook group. But everybody may not be on Facebook, so that may be another issue, but I'll stop there.
All right, I see Ellie's hand, and then I'm going to call on myself. So Ellie, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to ask Darrell a question, and maybe that'll be helpful and maybe not. I need to have some way of referring to a category that appears in Afghanistan and many parts of the world, which has to do with the fact that I'm a member of a species that is mammalian. And in the, I think Marx referred to it in one of his early writings as the first division of labor is the sexual division of labor, namely that there is among primates a sort, usually weaker than the male, that bears offspring. And that group that bears offspring is a part of the ecological order. And so if I say I am part of nature, not in charge of nature, even though as a human being I can exercise far more power through possessing language, I still need a way that will describe the lot of a half of my species or more than half of my species in terms of the fact that among them I find the persons who are among them I find the people who are capable in terms of that division of labor of reproducing the species. How shall I refer to them in a way that is specific to that issue? And also, how do I refer to the fact that this particular group has never had the possibility of making laws? There's not a single political institute, not a single city. There is no political entity that has in legend or in fact its foundation from that portion of the species. I know I used to refer to them as women. Yeah. And I suppose it's possible for a male member of that species to transgender, but that still doesn't cover that aspect of it, of the kind of oppression that women experience in Afghanistan, in Nigeria, and in many other parts of the world, including parts of the United States.
Well, I think you answered it to
Elliot-
some degree, Elle, and it's great to see you, by the way. I've known you for years and not seen you much, and it is great to be able to see your face. I read your posts often and have over the last decade, but it is so wonderful to actually see you.
I appreciate you too much, very deeply, because
I think
I like to think.
I think there are two things that there's a flaw, and then you already answered it, but you don't know you did. So the flaw is in Mark saying something about the reproducing portion of our species being weaker. I would actually argue that until you push a thing through a small part of your body and say you're weaker than the thing that can't push something through their body, I'm not so sure. I think that's a male paradigm that decided that men were stronger because they decided that doing physical things and certain physical things like hunting and gathering were more important than the other things. But someone carrying 30 pounds of water on their head is not a weak person. And doing that multiple times a day, much different than somebody riding on an animal and using an arrow to capture a piece of meat, cutting it up and bringing parts of it back, and dragging it along behind the horse. There's not a whole lot of physical power needed for that. But so I would venture to say that premise about the female portion of the species being, or the portion of the species that can bear children as weaker is flawed from the start. But the answer to your question, I think, is that you said, I used to refer to them as women. And then you said, but I guess males could also then trans, but then that wouldn't do it. And so the answer in that is that you use women in one context, which would equate to the opposite would be, theoretically opposite would be men, and then you said male, which the opposite of that would be female. So I think it would be appropriate if you referred to people that are theoretically able to bear children as female and the others as male, and anyone that's in between the two would be transgender, which is the whole point of the argument. I think they would be between genders, and some trans people cannot bear children, some can, but it depends on where they are in that transgendered nature. So for instance, if I were born female and could have children and decided that I should have been male, and I transgender and become and live in and assume the role, the place of the male species, portion of our species, then it doesn't take away from my original ability to bear children, but once I start my transition, that ability to bear may go away. It may or may not go away, depends on what hormones and what medical surgeries people are doing. So I think that referring to people as female and male and trans men and trans women make the most sense to me.
I'm going to appeal from the chair that if we start getting into this much substance, what we discuss on the blog, we will be here for many hours.
Days.
I was hoping that we could wrap this meeting up in an hour and a half, which would make it 1 minute from now, which we're obviously not going to do. But I'm just going to appeal to everybody. This is a very important discussion, and I don't want to diminish it, but I don't think this is the time or place to have it.
Agreed.
Okay, so I was going to call on myself in response to Daryl on the just the logistical question of how we proceed and what we do. And I wanted to say two things. One, when you were not, before you came, Mary Rooker raised what I think is a wonderful metaphor for how we should think of this process, which is we are asking the extremists on both sides to step out of the room so that those who are capable of actually having a dialogue with each other can have that dialogue. To me, that means making this space that we're creating more restrictive, or erring on the side of being more restrictive rather than more open. This is the dialectic that I think CJ was talking about and others also. We're going to have to work that out in life. Here's what I want to suggest in terms of our process tonight. I think CJ should write up her whole list of questions that she doesn't have an answer to and post
Fair.
them to the CC list. I think we should initiate an email exchange about different people's answers to those questions. I would like, what Alan says about the space that I can create is that's exactly the kind of space. People have to email something and we have to translate it to HTML. And I've done that. And I know it's a lot of work. So I would be happy if the people with the technical capacity to do it a different way, and I think that maybe CJ and Alan and maybe Daryl would form a subcommittee to figure out, based on some of the answers that we generate to CJ's questions, how we're going to proceed technically.
That all sounds good to me.
I'm sorry?
That all sounds good to me. We
Okay.
can lean on CJ to itemize the things we need to think about and what our options are. Then the rest of us can chime in and see where we can make useful contributions.
I'll
right.
try to remember what people said, but I will
No,
at the very least start the email chain so that people can chime in with what I've forgotten and we can go from there.
Okay.
Well, it's also recorded, so you could also listen back to what you said in the recording.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is all being recorded.
So Daryl, are you willing to be on that subcommittee? Do you have expertise to be on that subcommittee?
I don't think I necessarily have expertise. I have experiences, and I might be able to respond to things as a end user. How will this work for us? And thinking about it along the way. So I might contribute from time to time, but I wouldn't depend on me to.
Okay, so we'll make
to
Alan
lead,
and CJ. All right.
Yeah,
We'll
I mean,
make
they can
Alan-
send an email and say, "Hey, we're looking at this. What do you think?" And I can respond to those a little easier.
Right.
Mhm.
Obviously, every committee we're setting up tonight is going to have to consult with the broader collective. The other thing I will say to you is we have a 3-person subcommittee that I'm calling the blog committee. So that I don't have to be the person to kind of decide everything, which always makes me uncomfortable. And the 3 volunteers we had out of this group are me, Tekla, and CJ to be on that blog committee. And I will invite you, we're going to invite everybody, anyone who wants to volunteer to be on it can be on it, but it means being willing to invest, to make a certain priority in your time for the nuts and bolts and detailed questions of how we're going to make this work. So I'll give you the opportunity now. You don't have to speak up now. You can think about it later and volunteer to be on that committee if you want to.
I will think about all of these pieces and see what makes sense.
Okay. So I think that winds up our agenda. Although let's give Daryl, some time to kind of talk to us about what he's thinking. I mean, you've talked a little bit about it, but if you want to talk more, let's make that the last point on our agenda before we wind up tonight.
Yeah, I'll say just a tad. I think I said it in my answers to Ellie and in the other comments earlier. The sort of where my head is in your email, I think you all kind of may have a sense of where my head is around some of this. At the end of the day, my concern is the inability of people to hear and see other people's point of view, and to then determine that other point of view is something that is against them or denies them something on all the different sides. And I struggle with that. I have done some reaching out to some of my friends in different places to gather a greater understanding about it, and how words can be seen as violent towards people. You know, my feeling is that, you know, that some stuff is clearly doesn't make sense. And so I'm like, why are we arguing about things that don't make sense? Let's look at the things that at least have some plausible reason for conversation and dig into those, and then come up to figure out how we want to coexist. But so I feel like at some point this group will have to determine, if it can, what its, like I said earlier, what its basic tenets are, what its basic beliefs are, and that the people in this group either share them all or share multiple perspectives, and all of that gets stated, so that we can say we aren't all in agreement on certain things, but these are the things we do agree on. These are the things that we differ on, but we're still willing to have conversations around it. And what does that mean about conversation? What are we having a conversation about? Are we having a conversation about someone's basic humanity and right to exist, or right for self-determination? Probably not, because those things we would probably agree are people's rights to do. What we are maybe having a conversation about is, how do we make space for everybody to be who they are, in a way that does not harm or make somebody else feel like they are compromised. And that is a challenge I think that our society is facing right now. But it may require us to think out of the box and think differently, and rethink our constructs around gender identity, around sexuality, sexual orientation, around what it means to be male or female, or man and woman. Maybe those concepts haven't served us and have stopped serving us. And maybe it's time to begin looking at other ways of having a cosmic look, or a more universal or global look at what these things might be, and eliminate the barriers or lines that we've used to help us navigate our difference, or our otherness. We may need new ways to do that, and that may be what we have to talk about. But I think the fighting over some semantics about words isn't helping us. And then also just people that refuse to. So I'll say this: I had a conversation with someone, and in the entire conversation, they absolutely refused to even use terminology that was what other people were using for themselves. And they wouldn't, and their argument was always, well, it was a philosophical argument. Do you think someone can change something, like saying, do you think someone can change their race? And that there is no easy answer to that question. It depends on who you are and what you think. If I'm a person who feels like I'm transracial, or I've moved beyond race and I am not anything, don't call me any of that, then I might say, yeah. But other people around me might say, nah, you're still Black. You know, and I might beg to differ, because what Black means to me may not be about my skin color, right? Which is brown and not Black anyway. So, but if I say to you, my name is Daryl, and you keep calling me Lee, because that's my middle name and that's what you knew me as, and I'm like, I don't want to be known by that. My name is this. Or I changed my name to, you know, Malcolm X changed his name. Tina Turner changed her name. You know, Cher changed her name. Like, people change their name. Madonna is not Madonna. That's not her real name, right? But we don't tell them they can't be who they say they are, right? So how do we get to a place where someone says, who I am is this, regardless of what you see or what you've experienced or what you thought? How then do we feel we have the right to tell someone that they aren't or cannot be that? Even if you say, well, you're a version of that, but you're not. I'm that too, but I'm this kind of that, right? And you're that kind of that. Those are possibles, but I think we have to figure that out. And I don't know. I fear honestly that the Green Party is going to implode on some of these issues and will not be able. It will neuter itself and be ineffective, because the people in the party will not be able to work with each other, and people on the outside will say, I don't want any parts of that. Whether they agree with any side, any other sides or not, they don't want the fighting. They don't want the infighting. They don't want that stuff. And I think that people are going to walk away from us because they're going to see there's a level of intolerance on all the sides. And that's the part that people, I think, aren't seeing, is the intolerance is what other people outside are going to say. I don't care what you believe. I believe what I believe, and I'm good with me. But I don't want to come hang out with you and your intolerance. Like, even if we agree with some of the same things, the way you're saying it and the way you're acting towards other people is so intolerant that I don't want any part of it. So I think we run the risk of even our allies being refusing to be in relationship with us publicly, and therefore not joining the party because of those intolerances, and it's across the board. So those are my fears and my concerns. That's why I'm willing to be a part of the conversation, although I'm tenuous about this group and any other group right now, because I really don't know what that impact is going to be, and what we roll out and how we roll it out will affect our political cachet that we might have in the party. You all right, sweetie? What's wrong?
My ear.
What's wrong with your ear?
My ear just got
Okay, I'll look at it. Give me 1 second, okay? It looks okay to me. Come. Pick up your shoe.
No, my shoe.
She sprayed me.
Okay. All right. So, all right, well. Okay. All right. So yeah, so that's it. I'm gonna stop there. I don't want to keep you guys on that. You guys have been on longer than me, and it's not your fault that I was late. And I don't want to keep you longer because I was late. So but I'm sure we'll have many time to talk about more of these things, but that's just kind of where my head is hovering right now. And so I'm ambiguous right now about a lot of these things, is the best way to put it.
Sometimes ambiguous is a good place to be. A lot of these conversations start out with people coming in and saying, well, first let's start with the conclusion we're going to reach. And if you're not already on board with that conclusion, I don't even want to talk with you. The whole terminology game, going back to Ellie's question and the way it was expressed, it can be very frustrating to have to use up 5 paragraphs to describe something that previously had a single 1 or 2 syllable word that would convey that. But when the very subject under discussion is how are we going to conceptualize things, and which of the words we have previously used to mean things are now going to have different meanings. You can't start with the conclusion already embedded in your conversation, or you're not going to ever get anywhere. So sometimes we have to say, all right, I can either tell you what word I'm going to use for now for purposes of this discussion, and here's how I'm using this word. Or if it turns out that that's too loaded, that is offending too many people to use that particular word in that particular fashion, I'll invent a new one. I'll call it Ishmakabibble, whatever. But we'll, so that we can move on from that and not become embedded in what words are we going to allow ourselves to use to mean what.
Daryl, can I ask you just a quick question?
Absolutely.
I would love to see a first draft by you of the questions you think we might find commonality in this group, and the questions where we might differ and agree to discuss. Or I can't remember exactly how you formulated what you think the kind of text we should come up with. But if you could do a brainstorm with us, and just, the same way CJ is going to give us her questions, give us something to think about, I think it would be very productive.
Okay, I'll listen back to the recording and see what I said, if I can pull it out.
Okay. Very good.
Usually once I put it out there, it leaves me. It goes on, I'm on to the next thing.
Ellie?
Yes, as far as I'm concerned, I have to make sure that you understand my prejudices. My prejudices are that what should be occupying the National Party right now is the issue of climate change and poverty and the relation between the two. And so for me, discussion of these particular issues is occurring in a way that very few people here have the experience or the ability to approach in the way that Darrell suggests. The issue of intolerance is a very important issue, and accusing people of being intolerant doesn't help. But I know intolerance when I see it very simply because the person tells me, I can't talk to you because you don't agree with me. And if you're not willing to say X, then I know you're an enemy. I don't even know what I'm saying if I say X. What about saying Y? What about saying these other things? Why do you insist? Why do you insist that in order to be a member of a party committed to ecological wisdom, do you not accept the fact that dissent is absolutely necessary and that that dissent has to be expressed in a way that makes it meaningful to the people with whom one is trying to solve a problem? We're here to solve problems, not to state ideological positions, and especially to state ideological positions on issues that are of importance to very few people. I was at a party this afternoon with people from the ages of 6 to 98. And in that room, there were people of all ages, all racially. But one of the things that came up was this generation, referring to the younger people in the room, is totally flexible about gender. It's not an issue to them. They do what they want. I've been around people most of my life who don't care about color of skin. I grew up that way in southern New Jersey and in Philadelphia. So I don't even understand the lack of focus on climate change and poverty, because the two are intimately connected. And right now we've just come through a crisis of an epidemic. And why the party is not focusing on the opportunities that are created by crises and instead are drawn into such discussions, which are just part of being human, is being everything and anything. And what one is, and there's also a mistaken notion of personal identity, as though identity is essential to idea of a person and who a person is. Identity is not necessary. And when you we have to be in a position to examine a conception of a person that isn't dependent of personal identity. Identities change over time, and we are responsible for those
Ellie?
changes. And we have to understand that, but just the assertion of an identity means what? A self-interest? I don't know what it means.
Ellie,
That's
I don't want to cut you off, but I did kind of ask that we not get into the whole substance of the conversation tonight. And I feel a little uncomfortable right now, but I would like to ask if you could wrap it up.
okay. I'll put it in writing.
Yeah, that's best. This is exactly the kind of thing we need in writing on the blog itself. So that would be perfect.
I will put it in
Uh,
writing and
Is there anyone else? I'm gonna ask if people want to wrap up in just a couple of minutes each, if anybody has final comments. I see Mary's hand.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
don't,
Mary.
I don't want to get into this whole thing either because I have a lot to say about it, but not tonight. I just want to make two super quick points. Youth are not necessarily educated about feminism and feminist theory. Nobody is, and youth especially. I know of so many people who think they're a feminist, they're convinced they're a feminist, and they know feminism, and they don't know jack squat. Okay. It's like everybody I know in my circles, oh, I'm not a racist. Yeah, yeah, sure. Okay. That's your story and you're sticking to it. All right. So I think education is really important, especially with youth. And I would not assume that youth are aware. I think they have a wonderful perspective at times, but it's different. And the last point I wanted to make is I don't want to leave the room with the sense that I don't love extremists, because I used to have trans extremist friends, and now I have gender critical extremist friends. And I love both of them. They're wonderful people. And I think they're perfectly welcome. I love hearing extremist views myself. Personally, they've been very transformative for my life. But we need to be able to talk, because if you can have a discussion, it's rich and delicious. It's when one side says, no, we can't discuss this, that I get frustrated. I'm like, but this is so fun. I could learn so much from talking to you. So that's it.
Okay. Anyone else with final 2-minute comments? If not, I want to I think we had a very productive meeting. So thank you all.
thank you.
And we now have more work to do. And we now have a means of getting the work done, which is even better. Okay.
Good.
I will
Right, Alan,
send
will
links
you
to
send
the
out-
recording once it's
Yes.
posted.
Thank you,
All right.
everybody. I'll say good night.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.